Welcome to the EventMaster intro. My name is Vincent Ayala. I'm a lead sales support engineer for Barco Inc. And again, I'm here just to talk to you about our image processing line. What does it do? How does it work? What's the big hubbub about? So, with the aid of a PowerPoint that we're going to talk to this morning, I'm going to walk you through, the different processors, the different configurations that we offer, as well as some terminology that we use inside of EventMaster, inside of the EventMaster world. Once we complete that, we are going to walk through a basic setup. The basic setup will actually happen right before we go to break. So we'll do that till about 9:50. We'll go to break. We'll come back, and then we'll start talking about programming, like how to get pips on screen, or windows on screen, or layers on screen, whatever you refer to it as, and how to make a cohesive look or an image composition come out of an output, right? So again, this is the very basics. So without further ado, I'm just going to get started on the PowerPoint. So we call this one image processing in a few pictures. So what do we do? How does it work? What is it, right? What is image processing? Well, it's the ability to take multiple multi-format sources, mix, layer, compose them, utilizing our image processing, and then send them out to one or many displays. Sometimes they're in an array of displays, like an LCD or an LCD panel display, LED array, just standard monitors, some of our world-famous projection, right? Or even sending out to a record feed, sat truck feed, pretty much anything that can accept a video signal, right? That's what we would consider a destination or a display. Okay, now it's up to the user to decide how all of that gets processed, how the throughput of it, and how it's displayed. So what we're going to do real quick is we're going to talk about a few of our products and whatnot. So right here we have the Image Pro line. The Image Pro line assists us with our scaling, so scaling and conversion. So we have the Image Pro 2 and the Image Pro 2 Dual, which assist us in up-down cross conversion of both digital and analog, while the Image Pro 4K is primarily for digital. Okay, so we do up, down, and cross within the digital realm on the Image Pro 4K for formats like DP 1.2, HDMI 2.0, and 12G SDI. Not so much on the Image Pro 2 or the Image Pro 2 Dual. Those are primarily 3G and dual link resolutions. So we talk about conversion. What is conversion? Conversion is one signal format to another, or one connector to another, with reclocking. So when we do that conversion, what we do is we actually convert everything to RGB or SMPTE color spaces, also known as RGB or YCB-CR internally, and then we give the user the option to use one of those color conversions on the output as well. We do up or down scaling, or up, down, and cross conversion. So we can take PAL NTSC to 4K or UHD, or kind of any iteration, or we can go from 4K down to NTSC. So we do up or down scaling. We do it quite well, actually. So let's take a look at the EventMaster family. We have the Image Pro line, we have the EX, we have the S3, we have the E2. Now, before I get too far into the E2, I think the biggest thing we want to specify is that they're all pretty much the same thought process. They're all pretty much the same build process and dynamics, right? The software is the same, the cards are the same, everything is the same, except we have increased or decreased capacity depending on which box you need. And what that means is that's not necessarily a bad thing. That could mean that if you don't want to buy into the biggest E2, well, you can have the same functionality in one of our less expensive units like the S3. So real quick, so now that we're into that, let's talk about the E2. So what does the E2 do? Well, it does single screen and or widescreen image compositions, as well as auxiliary outputs. What does all that mean? Well, as we can see by this slide, on the bottom, we have a single screen image composition where we've taken one source and overlapped it onto another to create this compositional look. We also do widescreen image compositions, so we can create wider than normal aspect ratio, wider than regular aspect ratio screens. Like the one up top there is probably a dual wide HD or dual wide 4K with a couple of pips or layers layered over the top of it, right? So to create that composition. Here's an example of all of those things in play, right? We have a screen image composition right there in the center, which is multiple projectors, kind of blended together or data doubled or feathered or however you want to refer to it together to create one large image composition or one large cohesive image. And then we have scaling and conversion happening throughout the delay screens, throughout the side screens, throughout the building. Some that we see here, some that we don't, right? I'm sure that's also going out to a record feed and a SAT truck or whatnot. So the E2, we're not going to beat you up with the specifics on it. Here's a little data sheet that you can refer to this video later if you need to. The E2 can essentially take in 40 HD signals and output 40 HD signals. Take in 40 HD and output 18 HD. It can also do 4K, right? So when we talk about 4K, 4K is essentially, or UHD/4K is essentially a 2x2 matrix of HDs, right? So it's 2 wide by 2 tall HD or 2K to create an overall resolution of 3840 by 2160 or 4096 by 2160, also known as 4K. So when we talk about 4K in the E2 can do up to 16 4K in and up to 8 4K out in various utilizations, right? So it can be maybe a couple of 4K outputs for screen destinations, maybe it could be a couple of 4K outputs for auxiliaries, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the S3, again, is essentially the same box, just less capacity, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Can actually, or here's a data sheet on that, right? So refer to this later if you like. The S3 4K when we talk, the S3 4K when we talk about that, it can take up to 5 4K in and output up to 6 4K out. So we'll get to talking about that later. Now the great thing about the E2, the S3, the EX, the Image Pro 4K line we'll talk about later. Actually, there's a slight rule to what I'm about to say, or a slight caveat to what I'm about to say. Can accept all of the Gen 1, Gen 2 cards. The Image Pro 4K can actually only accept Gen 2 cards, which again we'll talk about later. But the E2, S3, EX can all accept Gen 1 and Gen 2, both in the E2 Gen 1 and the E2 Gen 2. So keep that in mind. E2 Gen 2 can accept Gen 1 cards. Don't be afraid to put a Gen 1 card in your E2 Gen 2. So E2 Gen 1 cards like DisplayPort 1.1 HDMI and the HDMI 1.4 Duo combo card, the DVI-D card, the 3G SDI card, or you step into the Gen 2 cards like the Tri-Combo In, which has DP 1.2, HDMI 2.0, and 12G SDI. Multiple 12G SDI actually, or you can go with the quad DP 1.2, quad HDMI 2.0, or even the CXPIO card. Cool thing about the CXPIO card inside of the E2 and S3 is it conforms to whatever slot you place it in. If it goes into an output, then you'll see it on the output. If it goes into an input slot, then you'll see it as an input. We're not going to really cover too much about that card in specific later, but it's out there. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. On the output, we have pretty much all the same cards we have as the input, except we added a Gen 2 Fiber, Gen 2 Fiber SFP Plus card. So the Fiber output card is essentially a BYOT or a Bring Your Own Transceiver card. It allows us. It's kind of like a Gen 1.5, or a low Gen 2. It essentially has the capacity of a Gen 1 card, but it's in our new Gen 2 format, and we consider it a Gen 2 card, to be honest with you. It does one 4K output with a split, plus a split, or it will do 2 discrete 3Gs. Now the great thing about this card is it uses, like it says, bring your own transceivers, right? Well, we happen to use Embryonics 21G transceivers with the LC connectors. That's what you see here, right? So we can send, you can drop in, you the user, or you the end user can drop in any of those transceivers, and as long as it can receive on the other end, it should just work. Should work just fine. Great thing about the fiber output card as well is that it runs off of SMPTE standards for the fiber optic. So you could potentially use our fiber input card for our Barco UDX or UDM projectors, or it could send it to a different piece of equipment, maybe a different manufacturer, as long as they can accept the SMPTE standards, anywhere from ST259 to ST2082. It should work just fine, right? And we've proven it both in real life and at Infocom. And we ran an awesome setup using it. If you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to us. So when we talk about, when people talk about EventMaster or E2, they talk about Gen 1 versus Gen 2, and everybody says, I really need the latest and greatest, which we're very happy to hear. But the reality of it is that there's not much difference between the Gen 1 and Gen 2 chassis, per se. The Gen 2 does have an upgraded power supply, so if it's fully loaded with E2 Gen 2 cards, there's no power issues or anything like that. But the other major difference is the Gen 1 basically has the ability to take in up to 12 4K inputs, while the Gen 2, the E2 Gen 2, has the ability to take up to 16 4K inputs. And really those are kind of the only differences. Again, you can reference these two slides, go back, pause it, reference these two slides later on if you really want to talk about the difference in capacity on those two units. Okay, so we talked about the two types of very lightly talked about the two types of outputs earlier. We have image compositions, also known as screen destinations, and we have conversions/scalars, also known as auxes. Those are two very different type of outputs, and we'll refer to those by their proper names later on, right? We'll call them screen destinations or auxes as we progress through the setup today. So what's a screen destination? A screen destination is one or many physical outputs that feed the same screen or the same array of screens or the same array of monitors or what have you. It can be a single screen, widescreen, or multi-screen destination. This screen destination utilizes scaling layers, also known as pips or windows, to create a composition along with backgrounds, right? So you can transition those backgrounds and layers seamlessly. Right, so here we have an example of destination 1 is a 3-projector blend with multiple pips into it. Destination 2 is a single screen output. Destination 3 also a single screen, just not a projector, it's a LCD panel. So as far as that image composition goes, or that screen destination, it can support backgrounds, whether they can be a live, a matte, or a still store background. Native, right? So you could do a native background with a still store, you could do a native background with an input, as well as a window that floats over the top of it, right? Which we would call a pip or a layer. I like to call them layers because that's what we call them in EventMaster toolset. So there are many, there are a couple different types of layers that we support. We support a mix layer. So if you take a look at the mix layer, it is essentially a windows with mixing transitions, right? It dissolves from one to the other. So you could see that source dissolving from one to the other nice and clean. Or we have a single layer, which allows you to do one of two things, either a broadcast quality cut or a dip to black or a dip to white while it changes the source and comes back in. So you can use these single layers and mixed layers in your image composition. For example, an E2 or an E2 Gen 2 can do up to 2 4K out, super wide screen, or I don't want to say super wide, but a widescreen destination that maybe is 2 4K wide by 1 4K tall. You can have up to 8 HD mixing windows on there, so we could see the mixing windows mix from one to another, right? And then go into that mixing mode. Or you can even do, or you can split it up and do 16 HD non-mixing windows. So a mix layer uses 2 HD non-mixing layers or windows. So if you don't use them in mixed layer mode, you have twice as many, right? So we're doing a 2x4K. We can have up to 16 HD non-mixing windows. Now, capacity differs for different input resolutions that you'll need to scale into those windows. And we'll talk about, if you want to talk about that, I urge you to come visit us at one of our classes, take one of our certification classes where we can actually dive way deeper into this. There's so much more that we're kind of, not including in this conversation because this is really just the basics, So come see us at one of our Barco authorized training centers. We're going to show you a link a little bit later on how to get to those. Okay, so image composition, we have those two types of outputs, image composition as screen destination or scalars and auxes for the S3. Now the S3 again is reduced capacity or can be utilized in a reduced capacity fashion. So if we do one 4K out, we can have up to 4 HD mixing layers, or if we do two 4K out, we can have up to 2 HD mixing layers, as well as the auxes that you've come to know and expect from the E2, right? So again, it's just less capacity, so less layers or less canvas space or both, right, for the S3. So here's some examples of the ways you can split that up. Maybe you don't want to do one 4K. Maybe you want to break it down into HDs. Well, you can do up to 8 HD outs with one single layer per destination, right? And then or you can do up to 2 HD mixing windows split across 4 HD outs. And then we can also do those auxes or one 4K or 4 HD, so on and so forth. So what is an aux? We kind of already mentioned it, but we haven't really talked about what it does or what it is. It's a single screen output that cannot be assigned any layers or pips, and any source in the system can be sent to an aux destination for up, down, and cross conversion, right? Everything will be scaled to the resolution defined in the aux configuration, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later on. Now, one of the things about the auxes is that it's a cut-only transition, so it's a single frame broadcast quality cut between sources. So one of the examples, or a couple of the examples for an auxiliary destination is a downstage monitor, a record feed, a sat truck feed, a green room feed, a stage manager position, maybe a rack room monitoring area where you want to see either the full screen or a portion of the screen, in real time. Now, one of the kind of duh moments we have here is that screens and aux destinations can be in the same system configuration. So you can have both. You can have screen destinations with your screen image, with your image composition, and you can have auxiliary outputs in the same system and control them all at the same time. In fact, I'll show you how to do that a little bit later on. We have the third output type that we don't really consider an output type, but some people do, so we'll call it the third output type, and that's the multi-viewer. And a multi-viewer is an output that allows the operator to see all of their inputs and destinations on one or many displays. In fact, when we talk about one or many displays, depending on the card that you utilize for your multi-view, like if you use a Gen 1 HDMI card, you have 2 HD outputs, 2 discrete HD multi-viewers. Or if you use a Gen 2 multi-viewer card, you have up to 4 discrete HD multi-viewers with 4 discrete multi-viewers or 1 4K multi-viewer with a split, and the split meaning like a copy of it. So you can have the same content. They're not discrete, but you can have up to 4 of those 4K outputs active. Again, not discrete 4K, but copies of the first, essentially. So the great thing about the multi-view is it's user configurable. So the user will go in and actually build their multi-view, and I'll show you how to do that later. I'll give you a live example of how to build a multi-viewer. So let's talk about linking. Well, we're going to quickly cover linking, so we can show you how well the family of processors work together. So we have the E2 S3EX. E2 can link using its expansion ports. S3 has the same. If you do link it, and I'm not going to beat you up on the numbers here, if you do link them together, you essentially increase the capacity, right? You increase your input capacity, you increase your output capacity, and it would be linked through this little schematic right here. And here's some more, ways to digest that information, right? More inputs, more destinations, more outputs, okay? Same with S3s, so we can have up to like 10 4K in or 4 4K out with aux scalars, right? Or two 2x4 image compositions with more layers, more, more, right? So some more slides about that. Image processing, we can even link processors to other processors. And like in this example, we have an E2 linked to two S3s for increased capacity. We do the EX, right? The EX is one of the newer products to the family. The EX stands for extension or expansion. So as far as expansion goes, you can link it to an E2 or an S3 for increased inputs, increased outputs, or increased canvas space or layers, right? The other side to that is extension. You can actually extend over a great distance utilizing our CXP over fiber, which we may talk about a little bit later. So again, we have the EX, which can also work as a standalone. So it can take in up to 6 HD inputs and output 6 HDs, right? It gen locks everything. It's great for resizing to match LED walls. It's a fantastic signal format converter with a TCI, TCO, also known as tri-combo in, tri-combo out cards. It could be a fantastic digital universal digital 4K 60 converter, right? We also, again, we use it as expansion. Now, the great thing about the EX is we did a video with Chuck Lazika of Nationwide Video, of Nationwide, explaining the EX and all of its ins and outs and how to use the fiber optic. It's also available on this YouTube page, the Barco Folsom IP YouTube page. So when you're done with this, go check that out. I urge you to watch the full 13-minute video. It explains the ins and outs of the EX, and it's fantastic, right? Okay, so the EX can use Gen 1 and Gen 2 cards for everything except for the CXP-IO cards, primarily because it's already built in, so it's not needed, right? So if you use it as a standalone scaler, you could do stuff like one 4K in, multiple HD out, or vice versa. You can do a signal format conversion, right? So if we want to go from SDI to HDMI or DisplayPort, we can do that as well. You can link them together and have more powerful, more capacity, right? So we can, if you link them together, you can do an 8x8 HD matrix switcher scalar converter. You can even, like I said, extend or expand existing products like the S3 or the E2. Now, this is one of those powerful photos that we like to show off where you can link up to 8 EXs to an E2. Then we have the Image Pro 4K. So the Image Pro 4K runs in 3 standard modes: standard program, standard preview matrix. It's more of a up-down cross converter for digital. You cannot use Generation 1 cards, only Generation 2 cards are supported in it. So I also did an awesome video with Tim Morin, formerly of Rentex, and that's available on the YouTube page as well. I urge you to go watch that, so I'm not going to spend too much time on the Image Pro 4K. So let's talk about some terminology for EventMaster. So we do EDID on the inputs, we do custom format outputs, and we can also read on our outputs. We could reach out and observe EDIDs on those and conform to them, maybe make a custom output for that, or a custom format for that output. We do support HDCP. We don't strip anything. If your devices require HDCP, all devices in the signal chain must be compliant in order for a picture to show. We don't strip. We don't bypass, hijack, hoodwink, or do any kind of thing like that to HDCP. We're fully compliant. Internally, we utilize a thing called the crosspoint. Our crosspoint matrix, which is an internal matrix router. It allows any input to be routed to any output. All inputs are available at any time, and all signals pass through this point. Before they hit that crosspoint matrix, they get converted to a system native rate. There's a scan rate converter on every input, basically, that conforms it to that crosspoint matrix specification. So by default, it's set to 5994. So we have an example where we have inputs that are 5994, 50, and 60. They all get converted on the input card before they hit the crosspoint. This allows for that single frame broadcast quality cut. So we support Genlock system reference, right? So black burst and tri-level on the E2 S3. If you terminate at the E2 or S3, it must be 75 ohm terminated. If you need to hook up and generate a Genlock signal in a pinch, you can use an EX or Image Pro 4K. They also generate Genlock. Connector capacity. So individual inputs and output connectors have a selectable capacity. This is the way we tell the box how to, whether it's a single link or 4K or dual link resolution. I'm not going to beat you up too much on this, other than if you're using Gen 1 cards, you may have to kind of reassign capacity based upon which card you've used or which spigot you're using and what resolution you want to bring in on those inputs. So one of the major notes one of the major takeaways from this slide is initial release Generation 1 I/O cards have a maximum capacity of 4 links per card, also known as 4 HD inputs, 1 link being 1 HD input. So if you want to do a dual link input, you might have to rob connector capacity from one to dedicate it towards another. If you want to do a 4K, you might have to rob connector capacity from 3 of them and add it to another. The rules are a little bit looser on the Generation 2 cards, because the Generation 2 cards have 8 links worth of capacity. By default, they have all 6 active, all 6 spigots active on a tri-combo. So you can actually add capacity to those as you see fit. So let's talk about EventMaster control surfaces real fast. We have the EC30, EC50, and EC210. The EC200 is now kind of end of life. The EC200 was the predecessor to the 210. They're essentially the same thing, except the 210 has upgraded CPU inside of it, but for the most part, they're physically the same now. We did a great video with Tim Cashel of Evolve Academy, showcasing some of the features of the 210. It's a fantastic piece. So let's take a look real quick. Let's step back, throttle back. Let's look at the EC30, which is our smaller, more portable, compact controller. It's a bring your own computer. There's no internal CPU. It connects via USB. There's 2 rows of mappable assign buttons. It's great for programming, quicker programming and preset access, and it comes with that sweet high-resolution T-bar. Small, compact, portable, fits into a carry-on size bag. It's fantastic. We have one in the studio here today. They're great. EC50 is a bring your own computer. There's no internal CPU for that one as well, but it does connect to the full integrated HD touchscreen through USB and DVI, right? So the touchscreen is actually active inside of it. It's pretty awesome little product. That comes with 3 rows of mappable assign buttons for quicker programming and preset access. Also has that sweet high-resolution T-bar. Now let's talk about the 210. It has a built-in dedicated CPU as opposed to the 30 and the 50, which do not. So that means you don't have to have an external computer hooked up to it. It is a standalone product. It has 2 full HD touchscreens. It has X, Y, and size wheels that allow you to move and scale your pips natively, right? We have the advanced programming section, also known as the right hand of the board. If you take a look at the left hand of the board, you'll notice it looks exactly like an EC50. If you take a look at the right, that's our advanced programming section, also known as syntax control or syntax-based programming. If you talk to any of the operators that have taken the course or anybody that's been trained formally on the EC210, they'll tell you that once you get used to it, it's actually lightning fast to use that syntax-based programming. High resolution, has the same sweet high resolution T-bar that's in the 50 and the 30, but this one does come with a built-in wheel mouse. So it's pretty much a standalone package. It's fantastic. We also support third-party control. So we have like the official Stream Deck plugin that's available. We're good with Crestron, where there's an app. You could find it right there through that link. Or you can use the Alfred Preset Remote, which is an iPad app, right? So we offer multiple control routes, not just through EventMaster toolset. And to take it a step further, we even open up the API so you can program your own control protocol, like through JSON commands, or use external media servers to fire off telnet commands at the box, right? We accept telnet commands. So with all that said, we're nearing the end of our PowerPoint here, and what we want to show you is that we offer in-person certified training programs, right? And you can find those links if you you can find the classes if you head to the link above there, and you follow through with, say, Barco Certified Operator or Barco Certified Specialist, where we really dive deeper. We dive much deeper in those classes. In fact, 30-minute PowerPoint that I just gave actually takes about 2 hours of the class time to get through, because there's so much more detail that we go into. We even offer expert classes, so if you want to take it to the next level, if you've passed your specialist class, you can come in and see us, or come in and see one of your come into one of your Barco authorized training centers. We have them all over the country. We have them in Sacramento, California, also known as Rancho Cordova, if you hit the list. We have them in Texas. We have them in Denver. We have them in Texas. We have them in Colorado. We have them in Florida. We have them in Nevada. They're all over the United States, right? So come see us at one of those classes. We'd be happy to have you. Okay, so I think we are going to go to our setup, right? So we're going to create a setup today. And what I want to do is just give you a quick look at what the setup would look like while I change over to my EventMaster tool set and prepare all of that, right? So that's ready to go. So here's the gag. We got a widescreen destination. We have a side screen. We have an auxiliary destination that we're going to set up. Now, it's not specified here on the setup on our quick drawing, right? On our quick drawing, but what the widescreen is essentially it's a large canvas of 3840 by 1080. It utilizes two 1920 by 1080 outputs, and those are going to be overlapped 600 pixels to create an effective canvas of 3240 by 1080. And we're going to use one of our MacBook Pros as the wide background for that, the native background. So we're going to set that to 3840 by 1080. We're going to use a couple of MacBook Pros as sources, and then we're going to set up a camera as well. We've got a little in-room camera over there set up. So we're also going to set up the multi-view for that, which you'll see bounce up periodically, as well as that side screen. So I'm going to walk you through that. And in order to do these setups, we do this awesome thing called BIOS. We have this acronym we call it BIOS, which stands for backgrounds, inputs, outputs, screens, and save. And actually, what we say BIOS, but what we actually mean is backgrounds, save, input, save, output, save, screens, save. We want to save after every step, right? It's important to save after every step, because if you do not save after every step and somehow you lose power at the venue, or something, maybe negative happens that you didn't want to happen, you'll lose all of your progress as you're going along, right? So essentially we try to beat it into you to make the habit of saving after every step. So BS, IS, OS, so on, so forth. Okay, so one of the first things we want to do is switch over to EventMaster toolset. Let's take a look at that. Here's our first exposure to EventMaster toolset. So we're just going to give you a really quick tour of it, and then we're going to move right into BIOS. So on the left-hand side here, we have our 6 buttons. We have our configuration button, our programming button, the Q button, the multi-viewer, the controller, and the settings. We're not really going to dive too deep into some of those buttons, but we may dive into the configuration and programming button. We have our save button down here at the bottom left. Make sure to click that a bunch of times, like I just did. We have our discovered tab, where we'll have all our discovered units. Now what you'll see here is 2 units. One is the demo E2 that I'm going to be performing the setup on. The other one is a stream E2, which my buddy Mike Pritchard in the room here is operating and doing a fantastic job. So we'd like to thank him for providing support today. So I'm going to take this demo E2, I'm going to drag it right into this drop zone that says drag and drop system from the discovered tab or manually into the IP address. So maybe we didn't see him in the discovered tab, we could potentially just drag it, or we could type in the IP address and hit enter, or hit add system, and it would add the system to our little deal here. So we have the detail view, we have the VPU resource, we have multi-operators, some things we're not going to talk about, but I just want to show you those tabs are there. We can rename the E2 if I want to. I could zoom out, I could zoom in, I can add an additional system. Say I wanted to take that other stream E2 and make some adjustments to it. Speaking of adjustments, over here across the top we have our adjust tab, or also known as the contextual adjust tab. That tab actually changes context of its contents based upon where you click. So if we click an output, it gives us a different context than if we click an input, or if we click the banner, right? So it's an ever-evolving tab. It's an ever contextually adjustable tab, or contextually adjusting tab. And we call it that. We call it the contextual adjust tab, and it's important that it's always anchored in the top right. So we really want to pay attention to that. All right, so we have our destination tab, our output tab, our multi-viewer tab, our input tab, our background tab, so on and so forth. Well, we have our background tab here. We want to create 2 backgrounds according to our setup. So we want to create a side screen setup, a side screen background, and a widescreen background, right? So we need to create 2 of them. Now let's go ahead and create, I'm going to grab one of these dead inputs and hit add single background. So if we take a look at the background and go to the contextual adjust tab, we can rename it here. So we'll call it the side screen. Now by default, everything we create in EventMaster is set to single link and 1920 by 1080 at 5994 because that's kind of like the most common. Now you can adjust the system native rate down here at the bottom, or you can adjust the actual resolution of the EDID to change over, and we're going to do that on the next step, but I'll show you that in just a second. So we've renamed this background to side screen. So we'll go back into our background tab. We'll select a second spigot. I know this is my wide MacBook Pro, so I'm going to hit add single background. Now if I had multiple backgrounds that I wanted to bring in at the same time, I could hit add multiple backgrounds, but I don't. So I'm just going to select this one. I'm going to call this one wide Mac. Oh, you know what? Let me call it 3840 background. Okay, 3840 background, we'll go to the contextual adjust tab. Now, by default, this is live hooked up to a MacBook Pro. It comes in as 1920 by 1080 because that's what the EDID is set to. But what I really want to do is set it to 3840 by 1080. But in order to do that, I actually have to adjust the capacity on it. So I'll select the capacity, the connector capacity, and select dual link. Now, I could have done that before I created the background, but it's possible to do it both before and after you create the background, as long as you have the appropriate capacity on that card available. All right, so we've set it to dual link. Now let's go down. Let's pick out our dual link resolution. So we should see it down here, 3840 by 1080. And we'll hit apply. And you'll see the current went from 1920 by 1080 to 3840 by 1080. And we see our actual input, it went invalid for a second. Now, one of the things I have to do is I actually have to go over there real quick and adjust the display resolution to adhere to that 3840 by 1080p EDID that I sent to it. So I'm going to put you on hold for just 1 second while I walk over there and adjust it. Okay, so I'm back, and as you can see, the format status went to 3840 by 1080 automatically, right? Because I went over and I adjusted the output, and we'll see that later on. Show you that in the multi-view after I build it. Okay, so we've created our 2 backgrounds, and you'll notice that there's actually 3 different colors that are happening here. We have a yellow, we have a red, and we have a green. Those are indications of the status of basically the input spigot, right? So yellow means there's a signal coming in, but there's nothing assigned to it. Red means that there is no signal attached to it, even though the box thinks there's supposed to be one. And then green means that they know that there's a signal coming in, and they know that we're going to utilize that input later on, right? Okay, so what's next? Well, we save after every step, right? But let's take a look at BIOS one more time. So we got backgrounds, inputs, outputs, screens, and save. So next we want to do our inputs, right? Well, we've got a couple of inputs here. We've actually got 4 live inputs, and we're going to create a couple of others. So what we're going to do for this is we're going to select it and hit add single input, or we can select multiple and hit add multiple, and it'll create a file for each one of those. Now, by default, if we take a look at them, they're going to actually show what the inputs are coming in, right? Or again, by default, they'll come in as 1080p, right? Meaning, you can set up your inputs before you have them connected because you know that somebody may be unloading the truck and they're going to set up the source later on, but you're going to plug it into a specific spigot, so you can call out that specific spigot and set it up for it. Okay, so we've got our inputs set up. I'm going to go back and change them, or change the names of them real quick. So we'll call this one GRFX1. playback 1. We'll call this one VT 1, and miscellaneous input, and then a camera, right? So cam 1. All right, so we have our input set up. They're all, if we take a look at the adjust tab, they're all bringing in on their native resolutions. All right, so we take a look at our camera, 1080i, beautiful, perfect. All right, we're good to go over there. So then let's take a look at our next step, which is outputs. But before we move on to outputs, we've got to save, right? So we'll save save all those inputs, and we'll go on to our outputs. Now, if we take a look at our setup real quick, if we take a look at the slide for our setup real quick, then we'll see we have a widescreen, a side screen, and an aux destination, which is a total of 4 physical outputs, 2 for the widescreen, 1 for the side screen, and 1 for the aux destination. So if we go back to EventMaster toolset, we could set up our 4 outputs just like we set up our inputs. One of the rules that we kind of like to throw at new users is to split them up, split up the destinations on different cards. So let's do maybe screen destinations on one card and aux destinations on another, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to add these 3 screen destinations by selecting them, and just like we did with the multiple inputs, we're going to select add multiple outputs. We'll select, we'll grab the left one here, and we'll grab this one, and we know that's going to be my wide left. By the way, we're going to run a little bit over time. Sorry about that. Wide right. And then we're going to do our side screen. All right. And then we're going to select this one and hit add single output, and we'll call this one our DSM. Okay, downstage monitor. All right, so we have our wide left, wide right, side screen DSM. We know that they're all, by default, they're set up to be 1920 by 1080 there, so we're pretty good there. So we have our outputs built, we're good to go. So I'm going to hit the save button, and we're going to move on. So we've created our backgrounds, we've created our inputs, we've created our outputs. Now it's time to create our destinations. So let's create our screen destinations after we save and save again by going to the Destination tab. We'll select a destination and hit Add Screen Destination. Now, by default, it goes to one output, right? Because we had selected that one output. It goes to one output, 1920 by 1080 at 5994, with 0 layers associated with it. So let's just change the name real quick. We'll call this one the widescreen. And then let's add the second output to make it a true widescreen. So it's 2 outputs at 1920 by 1080. Right? So it's 2 outputs at 3840 by 1080, excuse me, at 5994, and let's add some layers to that, right? So we'll select the destination, we'll scroll down, and we'll add 3 layers to that, okay? So after we've added the 3 layers, we can start our data double process where we'll go into the wide. I'm not going to go into too much explanation on this, but we're gonna use this little explodey button right here on the right. We're going to select the portion, and we're going to go into data double. We're going to select the portion in which we'd like to data double and establish our data double value, which is 600, right? 3840 by 1080, less the 600 is 3240 by 1080, like we talked about earlier. And we're going to offset that so they're center justified on that canvas. Okay, so here we are offsetting it, and so we'll just assign the offset value to 300, which is going to center that data double into our canvas space. So this black area is our canvas space with our outputs observing it, right? Now, we can go into the feathering. We could actually do the feathering here in the E2, or you could do it at the projector, and there's a whole argument that we could get into about which one's better. But it breaks down, the ultimate argument breaks down to whether it's, the transmission method of the cable you're using versus what's available in the projector. So we're just going to show you how to do it here in the EventMaster toolset if you choose EventMaster toolset, which is fantastic feathering. It's a 12-bit internal feather, so it's awesome. So you'll select the left side of the right and the right side of the left. Those are your 2 feather regions. So they go from 0 to 100 and 100 to 0. We'll enable the feather, and then we'll add a 600 pixel feather. So there we have it. We're actually kind of done with this. We'll close down the Splody view. We have our widescreen destination. 2 outputs, 3 layers, it's data doubled, it's good to go. So we'll select our side screen. We'll go back to the Destination tab. We'll hit Add Screen Destination. We'll call this one Side Screen. We'll go into the Contextual Adjust tab. Let's add a couple of layers to it right off the bat. We know it's a 1920 by 1080 because that's what the output was set to, so we're actually good there. We can move on. All right, and then the aux will go to the destination tab, and we'll select the physical aux here, and we'll hit add aux destination. You'll see it differentiates itself. So we'll go to the aux destination and we'll rename it DSM to match the physical output that we renamed. And I'm not going to get too far into it, but we're going to set the aux capacity to accept dual link resolutions, so we could take in the background and scale it to the aux capacity, the aux output, or we could take the destination composition and scale it down and send it out of the aux output if we set it to dual link, because of it needs to be able to receive dual link, and those two items are dual link capacity. So that's it for the setup and configuration. I'm actually going to observe the break at 9:50, and when we come back, we're going to set up the multi-view real quick. We'll set up the multi-view, we'll go through the programming page and show you how to build some presets, some user keys and whatnot. It'll be great. All right, so join us back here at 10:05 after the break. We'll get started. All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So, during the break, it occurred to me that, this is just a basics class. We want to really break that down. This is just not even a class. It's just basic exposure. In fact, one of the other things that we would like to add is that the video of this setup has actually been out for quite a few years, and it's been sitting in the Barco Folsom IP page as how to set up an S3 Junior, or basic setup of an S3 Junior Part 1 and Part 2. And again, we talked about the difference between the processors. Well, an S3 Junior is essentially the same workflow as an E2 or an S3, just with decreased capacity. So if you miss anything today, if you need to come back to it, you can either come back to this video or you can go into a little bit more detail on the how to set up an S3 or basic setup of an S3 Junior that's found here on the Barco Folsom IP page, as well as we want you to come and visit us at one of our classes. So when we left off before we went to break, we had just finished programming our setup, right? Well, now we want to program our multi-view before we move on to our actual programming of our compositions. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to cover the multi-view, we're going to cover programming, to give you a nice good tour of the programming screen, and then show you how to build presets, utilize user keys, utilize maybe even show off moves or something like that. We'll see how much time we have. So we're going to go into the multi-view tab over here, the multi-view button. So as I click on this multi-view button, we should see the programming interface for our multi-viewer. All right, so over here on the left, we have the input tab where we see all of our inputs that are coming in. We have our background tab where we see all of our backgrounds coming in. We have the destination tab where we see all of our destinations, both the program canvas and the physical outputs. We're not going to talk about that though. Across the top here, we have our multi-viewers. We have multi-view 1, multi-view 2, 3, and 4. Because we are using a Generation 2 card, it gives us 4 discrete multi-viewers. Remember, we talked about that. So here they are represented as little canvases, right? So we have our 4 discrete multi-viewers. We can view all, or we can kind of zoom in and look at one specifically or 2 specifically, or so on and so forth. We can zoom out and see the canvas there. We can zoom in to get a little bit more detailed view, but we'll sit it down right at 100. And because we're only going to be using one multi-view today, we're just going to switch over to multi-view 1 and kind of pay attention to that one. So it's super simple to start building your multi-view. You go to your input tab. You drag and drop your input. You can expand it, make it smaller, take some more inputs in, right? We can go and drag all of our inputs in. Okay, our miscellaneous, that was a dead one, remember that? And then we have our camera. Okay, so we have our camera set up here. We can set these aside, we can start building a cohesive look, or we can go into our auto layout input and automatically take all of our inputs and lay them out, right, in a nice clean view. We also have tools down below to help us if something gets knocked off kilter and we want to readjust it and make it look all nice and pretty. We can do that. I'll get to those in just a sec. So let's take a look at our background here. Let's take a look at our wide background graphic. We can size it, and if we go to the contextual adjust tab here, we can actually size it here manually. We can change the horizontal position as well as the vertical position. Or if you're new to EventMaster, or I'm sorry, if you're an experienced user in EventMaster, we used to have custom sizes or pre-canned sizes, but now we have these custom sizes that you can build and create and edit. So let's say I wanted to make every input this size, so I would select it and I would select a custom size and I would hit override size. Maybe I could rename it if I wanted to, this size, and then I can take it and apply it to other by selecting the window and hit apply custom size, and you'll notice that they're now the same size, right? So I can replicate the sizes across instead of having the pre-canned customs like maybe the original users are used to seeing. The window size we're not going to really talk about. That's actually a future feature that's coming. So UMD text, we can change the UMD text, say on graphics 1 to this UMD. UMD stands for under monitor display, so that would be this little UMD text right here. Or we can reset the UMD. Now, if we do change the UMD text, it doesn't actually change the text of the input, it just changes the text of the input of the, changes the text of the UMD. So for this guy right here, for this cam, we could change it to like Jeff's cam, right? Or we can reset it back to cam 1, cam whatever. So we take a look at the output colors tab. The output colors tab is great, so we specify multi-viewer number 1. We can change the color of the borders. We can change the color of the UMD itself, right? So if we take a look at the multi-viewer, the demo multi-viewer output, right? We can see these changes happening on the multi-viewer in real time. Right? So here we could change the background. So we go to the background, and I can change the background to like a nice Barco red to match my, or we can go to blue or green or white or black, right? We can get, we can start to customize our interface essentially. So we see our actual multi-view. I'm actually going to start over again real quick. I'm going to hit the auto layout input, and we'll watch it just reset it, and we could drag in our backgrounds. So our background's already there, excuse me. We could drag in our destinations. So let's start dragging in our destinations, and let's make those a little bit larger, or maybe a little bit smaller, and you'll see that the preview and program are kind of tied together because those are the screen destinations, the screen canvases. So we'll take the side screen, we'll make that one a little bit larger. We'll take the preview for that side screen, and we'll take the DSM. Now, by default, sometimes I get a little lazy and I just drag them in and I go, oh, you know what? I want to make this prettier. I can either eyeball it out, right, and hope that the snap works, which we don't actually have a snap built in. It's just kind of automatically drags into those areas. Okay. Or I could go down below and use our window modification buttons. And those window modification buttons are very helpful. So we could do, say, multiple select, and we can select these 2. Or say these 4, and we can move them up and down, right, and move them all around. Okay. Now, let's say I wanted to align them all back to where they were up top. Well, I would select all of these and use our align relative buttons. So I can align relative top, or I can align distribute horizontally, which will then distribute them all evenly horizontally. So I could do that same to select the multi-viewer, unselect all. I could do the same to these 2 here, and then align relative, or I can use align absolute, which sends them to the edge of the screen. Okay, so I can align relative. I can select these 2, and then deselect these 2, align relative, take them, drag them over, and then do, say, these 2 and align relative top, deselect these 2, select these 2, and align relative bottom. And there we have, all 4 of these windows nice and clean. We could drag that one in. We'll unselect all of them, take this guy right here. So we have a little bit of a cleaner multi-view. Now, you might say, well, hold up. I want to make this side screen a little bit bigger, so I want to drag and, just make it a little bit larger. Well, as we do that, we'll notice this little error at the bottom that says overlapping windows not allowed, because we're trying to overlap onto that DSM window, right? So there are no overlaps allowed in your multi-view. Okay, so we'll turn multi-select off. So as we move that DSM, you'll notice that we're able to get a little bit bigger and release. Now you can overlap the UMD text. So it's possible to overlap a little bit of the window, also known as the UMD text. But once you try to encroach upon that original Windows little window, it stops you. Okay. The other side to this is if you hang off the canvas, you'll notice it goes crosshatch. That's because we don't allow you to have a canvas window or an input window hanging off of the programming screen, right? Off of the multi-view screen. You've got to be careful there. You can turn on the border. You can turn off the border. So if we take a look at select all, border off inside of the multi-viewer there, right? Inside of the multi-viewer there. You can see the border turning on, turning off. You can do the, yes, yes it is. Multi-viewer is on. It's great. You could turn off the UMD text. You could turn on the UMD text. You can turn off the AOI markers, also known as area of interest markers, if you want to learn what those actually are. Tune into our future classes where we're going to talk about IP for LED. You could do the auto layout input, which we already talked about. You could do the auto layout destination, which you can imagine will destroy everything and allow us to, or it automatically add all the destinations first before it adds the inputs. All right, so that's multi-view in a nutshell. As you can see, it's a pretty powerful tool. We'll reference back to it later on when we, as we create these outputs, right? As we start to work on in these programming screens. So let's make this one a little bit bigger before we move on, so we can see that when we come back. And I want to turn on my, AOI markers. Okay. On all of them, AOI markers. Okay, so let's take a look at the programming section. We're going to take a look at the programming section. Now, the programming section is where all the magic happens, right? It's where you create all of your image compositions to be utilized in your show or in your setup or in your facility or wherever you're using this EventMaster processor, right? Because it's not just driven towards live events, it's also driven towards permanent installs type stuff. So this is, like I said, this is where you create your composition. So I'm going to give you a nice tour of this and then go through some individual features and create these presets that allow us to recall later to, maybe on our controller or through an external software or whatever you may be using. So across the left-hand side, we have the Input tab and we have the Native Background tab. The Input tab, if you drag a source from here or you drag an input from here, it goes to the scalars. If you drag an input source or input from the native background, it will actually go to the native background. Okay, so it will then not use any of the scalars. It'll go to that native side. So we could use still stores, we could use live inputs, or we could go in and use mats. It's not found in the tab. The mats are found somewhere else. Maybe I'll show you later. Okay, so let's go to the Input tab because this is where we're going to drag all of our sources from for the scalars, and we will talk about the different types of inputs that you can use. You can use actual inputs, which utilize sources. You can use stills. You can use backgrounds as sources. You can use the multi-view as a source, and later maybe in a new software that's coming out, like 7.1 or so. Or you can use destinations as sources as well. So you could even do a sub-switching of a pip, right? Where you create a side screen destination, you switch inside of that pip, but you use that side screen as a window inside of your widescreen. Maybe I'll show you how to do that if we have time. We can go into list view or thumbnail view. Thumbnail view gives us this sweet thumbnail view where we can add thumbnails. I have them already on my computer, so I'm going to add a few. In fact, I'm going to ask for your forgiveness here while I just go through and add a couple so we can make this look a little bit more seamless. So I'm going to add graphics. Let's go with a playback. Let's go with a VT1. VTA, how about that? And we'll do a miscellaneous or a misc. Call that demo 1. And then we'll look at the cam. Now these are not constantly updating thumbnails, so you got to be careful there, don't trick yourself. But what you can do is you can add a still from the input. So if we select this refresh thumbnail, what it'll do is it'll grab a still from the input and assign it to the still. Inside of that input, you can freeze it. There's 3 levels of freeze. You have freeze at the input, you have freeze at the layer, you have freeze at the output, okay? Or the destination, I should say, the destination level. We could take a still from there, or we can add a source, add a new source. We're not going to talk about the source stuff really at all in this introductory course. But if you want to come see us, take one of the classes, I'd be happy to show you inputs versus sources. Or you can check out Evolve did a fantastic explanation of inputs versus sources a couple of weeks back. they did a great job explaining that. You could take in stills, so I can add a new still from PNG locally, or this is where I would see the list of stills that I captured from my, like, let's say my camera, right? So I'll go back into my stills and I took a still from my camera. Here it is, 1920 by 1080. It is a progressive frame, even though it was interlaced. It just takes a photo of whatever, it basically takes a photo of whatever the input was coming into the input at the time. All right, so here it is, there's my still. I could use my backgrounds as sources like we talked about earlier, where I could scale them up or down, but we're not going to get into that. Or I could use my destination. So here we have our inputs. Okay, we have basically all of our inputs coming into the box. We have our programming section, so we have program up at the top, preview at the bottom. If we take a look at each one of these, we could zoom out, we could zoom in, right? We can enable or disable them for transition. So that's how we specify which one we want to enable or disable. We have the lock to stop us from altering it while it's live on program, because this would be your program section, this would be your preview. So we have the, down below we have the freeze destination outputs. Again, that's with a layer of freeze. We can lock or unlock all of our destinations. We can select or deselect all of our destinations for transition or record into a preset. We can turn on our AOI or area of interest markers or turn them off. We can do multiple layouts. So up above here we have our options on which destination we want to really dive deep into, right? So if I select one of these and, like, say the widescreen, I can just focus on the widescreen, or if I just want to focus on the side screen or the DSM. But you got to remember, when you focus in on these, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. So if the widescreen is armed or the widescreen is enabled for transition and I go over to the side screen, that widescreen is still enabled for transition over on the other view. It's just not viewable, right? It's just not visible. So we can also shift these around and make these a little, make these a little bit easier to digest when we hit the View All button, right? So, let's say we want to make a specific layout where we only see the widescreen and the side screen as opposed to seeing either one or all. We can take and drag and drop the widescreen and the side screen into one of these layouts and select it. And here is our widescreen and our side screen. Okay, so we'll go to View All, right? We see all three of them, or we go to Layout. Or maybe we want to do a layout where we see our DSM and our side screen. So I'll select layout number 2, and here's our side screen and DSM. I can even change the name of these layouts if I want to, right, to differentiate the two. Okay, so I can change the names of those layouts. This layout's a pretty awesome little tool. I'll probably recall the layout number 1 later on. Over across the right-hand side, we have our adjustment tab, that sneaky little adjustment tab. Now it doesn't have anything to adjust, so it's kind of laying dormant. We have our layers tab, where we could see all of our layers for our different destinations and whether they're on preview or they're on program or whatnot. So let's take a look at the widescreen. They're both not being utilized right now, so they're yellow. If they were on preview, then they would be green. If they were on program, they would be red. Actually, let's take a look at that. So let's take a look at layer 1. Let's drop it into, widescreen, side screen. Okay, I want to go into side screen. Let's take a look at layer 1, go to the side screen. And here we have our layer, right? So here we have our layer. It's in preview right now, so we won't see it on program. It's a single link. It's layer number 1. It does not have a source associated to it, and it is a pip with a mix, right? So it gives us some information of it, right? It gives us some information. So how do we get the source into that layer? How do we get an input into that layer? Well, you simply drag and drop the input in, right? And there it is. Let's use the camera. How about that? We'll use the camera there. Okay, so we have our camera here. There's our sanitation wipes for social distancing and cleaning all of the equipment as we've been using it, right? Before it changes hands in of our operators here in room. So we have a camera that we want to send to program. Well, how do we do it? We make sure that the side screen here is enabled, and we just hit the all transition, right? Or the side screen is enabled for transition, and we hit the all transition button. And so you'll see it on our multi-view. If we switch over to our multi-view, you'll see it in our preview and our program. right? So there's our preview, there's our program. And here it is live on program, so if we move it here, there's our program. So we'll just take a look at the multi-view exclusively, you know. So here is our side screen with our preview and program. Now I want to lock that back up, and I don't want to touch it or move it or do anything like that. So essentially what we're going to do is make adjustments in our preview and then hit all trans. So we'll take like playback 1 or graphics 1 and we'll transition it to program, right? Make a move or move it over, resize it, maybe make it full screen, transition it to program, and you'll see it happening there in our multi-view, right? Okay, so let's switch it over to camera and then hit all trans. It's really that simple. You take an input, you drag it into a layer, and then you're on your way. Now you might say, well, hold on now. What if I want to add another layer, or what if I don't want to grab a layer from the layer tab and then add an input to it? Well, you could simply drag an input in, and it will grab the first available layer. It will grab the first available layer and transition that, and allow it to transition to screen, right? So you'll see that layer 2 here is superseding layer 1 or on top of layer 1. Our Z order goes layer 1 is the furthest away from you, right? So layer 1 being the furthest away from you, and then layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, layer 5, layer 6, layer 7, so on and so forth. Okay? So layer 2 is going to sit over the top of layer 1. We can actually adjust the Z order if we want to, but we'll get to that in just a second. Okay, across the right-hand side, we have the destination group, which we're not going to really go into. We have the user key tab. The user key tab is great. So user keys essentially allow us to record what we call, or what some people call treatments of a window or of a layer, right? So it's attributes that we can pre-select and record to be recalled later to one or many layers. So let's take a look at VTA here. And we'll go with, you know, I really like the size and position of that. Right? I really like the size and position of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my user key tab. I'm going to deselect everything except for position and size, and I'm going to save it as a new user key. And I'll call this one top left medium. We'll call that small. Okay. So we got our small there, and what we'll do is we'll actually bring in another layer, like our camera, and you say, you know what, maybe I'll move that one out of the way, and I want to go ahead and take my take those attributes that I had saved into top left small and apply them to that camera. I'll simply drag and drop, and it snaps in there. And I can do that with any layer that I bring into that destination. Okay, so it's pretty cool. You know, you can save attributes, position, size, source, its mask, the status of its mask, the border, shadow, the key, everything, right? So you might ask, but Vince, how do I adjust those things? Like, how do I add a border? How do I add a shadow? How do I adjust the mask? Well, it's as simple as going into the selecting the layer and going into the contextual adjust tab. And here's where you'll see all of the awesome adjustments that you can make to your layers. So we have the layer type, whether it's a pip or a key, right? We have the add keyframe, where we'll talk about moves. Maybe we'll go over moves if we have time. We can go into the layer main, where we can add our border or our shadow. So we could turn on the border, we could turn on the shadow, right? Maybe we want to do a shadow, and we want to do it blue shadow instead. Right? So you'll see inside of our multi-viewer. Inside of our multi-viewer, you can see the blue border, the gray border with the blue shadow on it, right? Or a white shadow, maybe you want to do a white shadow to it. And we can make all the adjustments to those. Or we can turn them off. Because if a border and shadow isn't done correctly, it doesn't look great. Right? We all know that. We've all seen that. So let's ditch the border shadow. Maybe we want to go in and do a mask. Well, we'd go into the window adjustment. Inside the window adjustment, we can adjust the size. Right? We can adjust the size of the window. Whoa, oh, there we go. We can adjust the size of the window. We can adjust the position of the window. Now these are very, very touchy controls. which is why we give you the plus and minus, or the ability to type in, or the ability to even reset, right? You can reset it back to 0, the center, okay, at a specified size, pre-specified size. Or here's where you can adjust your mask, right? So we can start masking off our layers. Now this happens at the layer level. It doesn't happen at the source level. It doesn't happen at the input level. It doesn't happen at the output level. These adjustments, when the contextual adjust tab is focused in on the layer, will happen at the layer level. Okay, so let's reset everything, and move on. Okay, so we can make those adjustments, and then we can go into our user key tab and select the adjustments that we want to observe and apply to something else, to apply to another layer and save those. Right, so it's very, it's quite an awesome little feature. All right. User keys, super useful when you start talking about controllers. Maybe if we have time, we'll work on, we have about 20 minutes left, 20, 30 minutes left. We'll talk about, maybe talk about programming a controller or something like that. So those user keys are super awesome for programming. They make life so much easier, especially if you're working in the LED workflow, and you have specified screen sizes for your LED that you didn't carve out inside of your AOI, or you want to always automatically drop something. You can even bind those user keys to sources, which we're not going to talk about. Just let that kind of flow over you. If you don't understand it, come see us at one of our classes. We'll show you how to bind a user key to a source. Okay, so I'll deselect everything and we'll move on. All right, let's go to the preset tab. So if we take a look at the preset tab and we go to the view all, right? The preset tab, essentially, if it's set to the preset tab, if it's set to complete, essentially what it does is it takes a snapshot of all of the destinations, their status, and if they're highlighted for transition or selected for transition, it will actually take a snapshot of that destination and all of the layers that are inside of that destination. So let me show you a quick example of that. Let's go ahead and let's let's drag in VTA over here. We'll make a quick look here. Maybe not the best of all looks. Let's go with VTA. Right. We'll just kind of build it out real quick on the rough cut. We can go back into the contextual adjust tab and get more finite and more accurate settings or positions for these layers if we really wanted to, but we don't. We're just doing a little rough in. And then let's do a camera on the side with a little VT in the bottom right-hand corner, or maybe a little graphics in the bottom right-hand corner. And then we'll do a graphics in the downstage monitor. So now every one of these destinations is selected. You know what? Let's go ahead and add the live background too, right? It's because we have the native background. Let's go to the native background tab and drop in that background, and we'll see that native background right here in our multi-view, right? See there in our multi-view. Great. So we see it in our multi-view. So if we take a look at those, we can recall that later, right? By creating a preset. So let's go to the preset tab. And let's save from preview, because we want to save from the preview section. Or we could save from program, even though there's nothing on program. So let's save from preview. I don't want to say nothing, but there's not really much going on program. And let's just call this look number 1. Now let's say we wanted to transition to a different look quickly. How would we do that? Well, we create a second look, or a second preset to transition to. So let's clear out. Let's go back to the inputs, and let's make these sides. Maybe make them cameras, and let's make the native background by selecting the background here, the background tab here, and going to the contextual adjust tab. Let's make the background a matte red. Okay, so we have a matte red there, and then we'll do. We'll go and select the camera. We'll clear that out. We'll use graphics 2, full screen, and then we'll select. Playback 1 for the downstage monitor, right? So for this one, if we select it, we go to the preset tab and we hit save from preview, it will basically record everything that's in our preview. So we'll save from preview, and we'll call this one look 2. So if we're in our preset tab, we have a couple of options. We're only going to show you complete, not relative today, although there is a video on relative presets that Tim and I did with Evolve Media, and you can go check that out. It's also on the Barco Folsom IP. We can overwrite it if we selected it. We can overwrite it from preview. We can overwrite it from program. We can delete it. We can enable a reorder. We can lock them all. We can unlock them all. If we lock them all, it obviously stops us from overwriting them or changing the name of them. We can unlock them all to where we change the name, or we could change the number as well. And then we have creation options. I'm not going to really go into that. So we could select it, say select a preset and hit recall current. And you'll see that it recalls that preset that we had made earlier, right? So it recalls that preset that we made earlier. Or we can hit recall look to. Now these are ready for transition because they sit in our preview. So watch what happens when I transition them from preview to program, right? Inside of our multi-view there, you can see it transition from preview to program. So we'll recall, hit all trans, recall, hit all trans, and you can see them transitioning, right? Nice seamless dissolve from transition from A to B. All right, so you might say, okay, well, that's a 3-step process. That's all fine and dandy, but what happens if I want to do it just a little bit quicker? Well, one of the things we could do is change the way we recall the preset. Like I can change the preset by selecting one, dragging and dropping it in, and releasing, right? And that'll automatically change the preset. Or I could select the thumbnail view and just recall them quickly by selecting the thumbnail. So there we have a very quick switch between presets, right? And we can even take that one step further, and we can say instead of recalling the preset to preview, we recall the preset to program. See how everything turns red? So if we select the preset, it'll recall the program, right? So we have our preset to program. And then we have finally we have our queue page, but we're not going to really talk about the queue page, so we're going to skip over that. Let's go back. I'll tell you what. Let's reset back to preview, and let's go back to list view, and where we can then rename, reorder, do the whole deal. Okay. So across the bottom, we've got some creature features for our operators, right? Like we have the multiple select on, multiple select off, so we can multiple select layers, right, and move them around. We can select all and unselect all. So maybe if we want to do a clear all, we could select all and hit clear, and it would clear all of our destinations, our layers, and our backgrounds, the whole deal, right? It clears everything where we transition, and now we're at black. Okay. We could do a match program. So let's say we transition to screen, and I wanted to take these 2 pips here, and I hit match program. You'll see that they match the actual program. We can unselect all. Let's turn off our multiple select, but let's select one. We could do a toggle or swap. Not going to get into what that does or how that works. We could do a freeze. We could do a clear, right? So I could select it, I could hit clear, or I could select it and I could hit freeze. Again, that's one of the 3 places you can freeze. Again, at the input, the layer level, and the layer level, and at the destination level. I can do a transition if I'm not frozen, right? I can unfreeze it. If I can do a transition of just one layer, even though all of my screen destinations are selected and ready for transition, I can do a transition of just one layer if I wanted to. Oh, excuse me. Let's go with the miscellaneous, right? So a little black, just solid black input. If I select it and hold it and hit all trans, you'll notice that only that layer made a transition. Only that layer made a transition, right? So I have a layer transition as opposed to an all transition. So I can start to specify which layers I want to transition. I have a fill vertical, a fill horizontal. You'll notice that if we fill the vertical, it maintains aspect ratio, filling it vertically. If we fill horizontal, it maintains the aspect ratio and fills horizontally. And we have a fill HV, which will destroy aspect ratio. So if we took in, say, camera 1, you'll notice it specifically in camera 1. If we go fill HV, it destroys the aspect ratio, but it does fill it horizontally and vertically. So technically, it works. So if we were in, say, graphics 1 here, or if we were in side screen here and we did fill HV, because it is the same aspect ratio, it doesn't alter the aspect ratio of it. It doesn't destroy the aspect ratio because it's filling horizontally, filling vertical, 16:9 on a 16:9. Don't fear though if you do fill HV, you can always fill vertical, fill horizontal to restore the aspect ratio, or you can hit the reset button, and the reset button will reset the aspect ratio and allow you to scale it up and down, move it around. Okay. More creature features here on the left-hand side. We have align absolute left, align absolute right, and we have the same features. Let's take a look at the widescreen here specifically. We have the same features that we saw earlier inside of our multi-view tab, where we can take and we can do a multiple select on, select multiples, and then do align relative top. We can do say align relative bottom. We can do align absolute bottom. We can do align absolute top. We can even do align absolute right or left, and what that's going to do is that will align them absolute right or left, right? So let's multiple select on again and then do align. But because we can overlap, you can see how easy it is to overlap them, right? And we can overlap with these pips to create these compositions. So you can see how easy it is to lose those pips behind each other. In fact, if you were paying attention, I recorded a preset earlier where I had a layer full screen on top of another layer. That's kind of a faux pas. It's a little bit of a bush league maneuver, but it's possible to layer pips, and that's the point of it too, right? And it might have been a small mistake on my part, but I want to show you that it's still possible to do, because we don't allow just one screen switching in, switching out. We allow that composition, and we allow you the ability to do that composition. That's important too, because later on, if you do pips with keys on them, or you want to do layering and window pipping, right? So maybe you have a backdrop where you show brick windows, and inside of those windows you want to put live inputs into those windows. So you can utilize the masking to mask off to those windows and assign them and layer them over the top of others, right? To create these looks ultimately, right? And that is the beauty of EventMaster toolset. That's the beauty of the E2 S3 Image Pro line, is that we allow you to do all of this stuff in ultra low latency, high definition and UHD. We hit all the buzzwords, right? We hit the 444 internal processing. We hit the 12-bit internal processing. It's up to the user to get 8 and 10, 12-bit in and out of it, right? So we do all this, again, at ultra low latency, about a frame to a frame and a half, depending on the route you take to, it actually could be subframe, depending on the route you take through our box, right? As opposed to a media server, where a media server has to process everything and could add extra frames to the output that are unnecessary, right? So I think we have a few more minutes. I'm going to show you how to program the controller real quick using our EventMaster toolset. So I've created a couple of presets. I have at least one user key. Let's create a second one so we can see some some changes here, some changes happening here. So let's focus in on the widescreen. Let's take and maybe on the widescreen I really like the way that this pip sits. So I'll do position, unselect everything. Oh, excuse me. Unselect everything and then select position and size. And I'll save this one as a new user key. I'll call this one left. Left, maybe I'll clear this out. I'll go in and I'll call this one right. All right, so I've got a couple of user keys that I can assign. I've got a couple of presets. I've got my destination set up. Good, good, good. All right, so if I go into the controller, I have the option, because I'm in a virtual, or because I don't have a physical controller hooked up to my computer, I have the option to either choose the programming for an EC30 or an EC50. Maybe I know an EC50 is coming later, so I'm going to pre-program for that. So once I plug it in, it automatically just takes these settings and drops them right onto my EC50, right? So it's actually really simple. You can go to your destinations, select your widescreen, drag it in. There's your destination button. There's your side screen button. We have our auxiliaries like our DSM. I can drag it there. I can even drop it into multiple positions. I can arm or disarm those, or not arm or disarm, excuse me. I can select for transition or deselect for transition those. So right now they're all deselected, see that? So if I go into my programming tab, they're all deselected. If I hit view all, they're all deselected. If I go back into my controller here, I can select them all, and we'll see in our programming that they're all selected for transition now. It's the same, same thought process as maybe hitting the all unlock, select all, deselect all, and you'll see that reflect in your controller. So when I can, my layers, these are hard buttons. These are, dedicated towards physical layers that are on that destination. So if I deselect my other destinations and I say select layer 1, if we go back into our programming tab, we'll see in my preview here, my layer 1 is selected for manipulation. I can go in and I can drop in maybe queues, sources, user keys. We have a flex bus coming soon. Preview source, program source, so you can use the controller as a preview program switch now, or coming out soon. That's pretty cool. User keys, I could drop in my user keys, so let's do that. So let's select user key, and we'll go left by just dragging and dropping it, and then right. So let's go back and take a look at our programming. Right, well, let's move our user keys out, or let's move our layers out. Select this one, clear this one out. We'll take layer 1, and we'll go back into our controller. If we select the user key on the on the controller, we select the left user key. We'll notice that it went to the left side. If we go back to our controller, we hit the right user key. You'll notice it shifted over to our right side. In fact, let's bring up the multi-view real quick. So if I select it to go to left, you could see it in the multi-view going to the left. If I select it to go to the right, you could see it in the multi-view going to the right. So you could see how you could utilize those user keys very quickly, right, to program. So you select a destination, you select the layer, you select the user key, and it'll perform the action that you want to make. Well, let's say you don't want such granularity. Let's say you wanted to go a little bit more broad, right? Well, we can take and go to the user key, take the assign bus and go to the preset button. We'll program our presets by selecting a preset and dragging it into the programming area, right? We'll drag it onto the little button. And if we say grab look 1, so it'll select look 1 and recall it. We go look 2, select look 2 and recall it. There's look 1 again. Here's look 2. So you have a control surface that allows you to recall these presets super quickly. Right? Now there's two sides to a console. Basically, you have your programming side, you have your preset recall side, and there's two different ways to set those up. We go through those ways to set those up inside of our classes once we resume them. So please feel free to stop by and see us, and we'll get you all dialed in on the controller. We do the EC30, EC50 in the classroom. We talk about inputs versus sources. We talk about all the granular details of EventMaster toolset. We show you how to do keying. We show you how to do moves. We show you how to do moves. We're kind of crunched for time here, so we're gonna omit the move deal. And that's pretty much it for EventMaster tools exposure to EventMaster toolset. I think if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. And please be sure to visit our website for the classes. And again, we want to thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, just reach out. Yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, yeah. Real quick, we want to show you a slide for contacting us, right? So we want to, again, thank you for participating. We want to thank you for participating and give you a path to path and QR code to register for our future training notifications. So, the plan is, I think, to continue to do these on a regular basis over the next couple of weeks, where we get a little bit more in depth and detail about specific things. Like one of the ones that we're focusing on will be IP for LED, or part 2 of this, where we get a little bit more detail about the engineering. About the engineering aspect of the E2, or we talk about other topics that we've seen requests for. We even talk about other topics that are in the classroom. They might not be as in detail as the classroom style, but there's still exposure. There'll still be fantastic exposure trainings. So with that said, hit that QR code hit that link, come see us, come tell us what you want to see and what you want to learn about. All right. So on that note, I think that's it for us here in Rancho Cordova. And yep. And we're gonna run a video on the way out. So go ahead and take it.
All right.